Hello, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And we have a very busy show on tap. Now, one piece of housekeeping news to give you. Normally, it's Jake Fromm on Tuesdays. We're going to try to catch up with Jake later on this week. He was not available to be on our show today, so we'll catch up with him at a different time and give you more information about that when we get there. But speaking of quarterbacks, Jake obviously is one. There is news today, or at least rumors, innuendo, if you will, about another quarterback. That's the five-star Dylan Raiola. Off the top of the program, we'll sort of figure out what we think might be going on here. We'll try to figure out what all of that means in connection to some other news that's been out there with Georgia as of late. We'll try to find out how real some of this might be as it relates to five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola and his relationship to Georgia. That is going to be a hot topic. We'll also continue our look at G-Day today. And while Jake Fromm can't be with us on today's show, Connor Riley, our good friend from DawgNation, will be. Connor was obviously watching G-Day closely, so we'll talk to him more about what was learned on the field on Saturday. And, Connor will have plenty of thoughts on Raiola there as well. So it is a very, very busy show. You have picked a great day to be with us. So what do you say we get it all started? DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the trickiest questions I have to ask myself in most weeks, certainly several times a month at the very least, is, of all the rumors that are swirling around, which of those do I take serious enough to talk about on a show like this? Thankfully, y'all have given us a very big platform here on DawgNation Daily. We're very, very proud of that. And so we have to be careful not to go chasing down and amplifying rumors that might not turn out to be true or might not have, they just might just sort of stay in the rumor mill, because a lot of times rumors kind of pop up and they don't materialize and they sort of disappear, and we kind of move on to the next rumor. And, trying to figure out which of those we take seriously around here is always going to be a pretty tricky question. Well, sometimes you kind of see a level of rumor swirling that you feel like you can't really ignore because it's literally being talked about everywhere. I think we're in kind of one of those instances here today as it relates to five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola and the belief, seemingly consensus belief, among so many on the internet right now that Raiola might be heading towards a UGA commitment, and it could come sooner rather than later. For all we know, it could come today. This, of course, is very, very fascinating. Now, let me kind of give you a couple of thoughts as it relates to this. And I guess as kind of a lead in on this, let me kind of go back to something that Raiola himself has said. I want to begin our conversation today by going back not too long ago when Jeff Sentell, our DawgNation recruiting insider, and we'll obviously be in touch with Jeff a lot this week, our DawgNation recruiting insider out in Arizona, the home state of Raiola, getting a chance to talk to him at that time about his relationship with UGA. Now, obviously, a lot has seemingly changed since then, and maybe in some respects, if you at least believe the rumors that are out there on the internet, the fast forward button has been pressed on all of this. But it's kind of a lead into where we are potentially with Raiola now. Let's go back to where we were with Raiola just a few weeks ago. This is our recruiting insider, Jeff Sentell, visiting with the five-star quarterback who may be the man of the hour right now, Jeff, with Dylan Raiola.
I think just the relationships and, just really seeing every school and what they have to offer. For me, it really coming down to relationships. You can show winning, you can show scheme, but, you can't fake, being who you are and who you are all the time. So just really, really getting to know the coaches at each school that I'm looking at, and really just trusting my family.
How much will your first commitment experience shape your next one?
I think that's big. I'm lucky I get a second chance at it. I just really want to be patient and really see what every school has to offer, and just, make the best decision for me.
Georgia is obviously one of the schools you've thought about for some time. They were your first offer.
Yep.
How do you feel about them right now? Like, what has them in the mix?
Yeah, I think you got to start with the leader, Coach Smart. What he does for his program, for his players, the development he has. It's really just you can't beat what he does.
So obviously that's very interesting. It relates to Dylan Raiola, and one of the phrases that Raiola uses there that I probably find most interesting of all is Jeff asked the question, okay, at one point in time you're an Ohio State commit, then you decommitted from that. You decided that Ohio State wasn't the place for you, and an early commitment, taking yourself off the market from a recruiting standpoint, that wasn't right for you either. How will that shape what you're about to do right now? And Raiola said, yeah, it's going to shape me in a big way. We've certainly been led to believe this is true, that Raiola felt like he made the wrong choice in Ohio State, but also made the wrong choice by choosing something so soon that he wanted to, as we would say in the dating world, sort of play the field a little bit. And he wanted to kind of see what else was out there and listen to the communication from other schools and sort of make a better decision based on all of his other options. But hard to deny over the course of the last few weeks that the relationship that Raiola has had with Georgia has seemingly really grown here, while the relationship that he's had with one of his other potential suitors, Nebraska, seems to have fallen off completely. And the other school that I think in the eyes of a lot of Georgia fans probably loomed the largest in all this, USC, that's changed a lot here as well. There have been some cryptic comments from USC coach Lincoln Riley that almost felt like a subtweet of Raiola, from some of his spring practice press conferences. There has been chatter from out in L.A. that USC has started recruiting another quarterback, seemingly a signal that they know they might not be getting Raiola. By comparison, you've seen Georgia content to stand pat here, while a lot of in-state quarterbacks, one that had a Georgia offer like Jake Merklinger went to Tennessee, another in the Atlanta area that's gotten plenty of buzz, Aaron Nolan, went to Ohio State. And with all these in-state quarterbacks doing everything they've done, you haven't really seen Georgia lift a finger. They have seemingly been quite content with where they are in this process, willing to let it play out with Dylan Raiola, almost as if they've known something, almost as if they've had a reason to be as confident as they've been in their decision to what appears to be go all in on Dylan Raiola. So here we are now, shortly after G-Day, and there's buzz that Raiola may be ready to pull the trigger on a UGA commitment. And I think it's important to note for people who maybe don't follow some of the recruiting stuff quite as, closely as other people do, what is surprising about this is not necessarily that Raiola is going to pick UGA. I think a lot of folks have kind of come to the conclusion that's probably where all this is heading. We'll have more on that here in just a moment. The only part of this is that surprising is the fact that he might be doing this right now as opposed to waiting later on in the summer, which will be what we thought, might be the case. So the surprise here is not, hey, Raiola might pick UGA. In the minds of a lot of Georgia fans and people who watch the recruiting stuff closely, it seems like possibly that's where this has been trending. The surprise is that it might be happening right now. Now, if that is indeed the case, if Raiola were to commit to Georgia here this week, why would that be surprising? Well, he's not slated to take his official visit at Georgia until the beginning of June. But what's interesting about that is that as it stands right now, that scheduled official visit for Raiola in June is the only official visit that Raiola has planned. And it kind of goes back to something that I talked to Jeff Sentell about a couple of weeks ago. I believe this was 2 Fridays, if you want to kind of go back into the archives of our show and go back and listen to. When I told Jeff 2 Fridays ago, and I thought he had a very interesting answer in response to all this, is that for me, the recruitment of Dylan Raiola has to a certain extent reminded me of Georgia's recruitment of Justin Fields. Now, I realize that didn't end the way that Georgia fans wanted it to, but nonetheless, that was a 5-star quarterback that Georgia was chasing down. And I remember the moment in which that I learned that Justin Fields was coming to Georgia. I'm not a recruiting insider. I'm not a recruiting reporter. I talk to recruiting reporters. We have Jeff Sentell on our show each and every week. I follow recruiting very closely. It's obviously a hot topic on our show, but by trade, I'm a talk show host. I'm not a recruiting reporter. So my way of finding out about some of this kind of stuff is a little bit different than other people's, might be. And I remember when I found out that Justin Fields was coming to Georgia, the way that I found that out is you realize the other schools that were in play for him, well, he's not going here because of this, and he's not going here because of this, and he's not going here because of this. And eventually, by process of elimination, Georgia was all you had left. And it was almost like if you ever played Clue, the board game when you were a kid, it's almost like the only thing that was left was the idea that Justin Fields was coming to Georgia. And sure enough, shortly after that, he, in a famous ceremony there at Harrison High School, made his decision. I have sort of felt like that's kind of how this has been with Dylan Raiola here or there as well. Obviously, Nebraska has all but waved the white flag if you're kind of following, their media circles and social media circles and message board circles run their program. It's pretty obvious no one in Lincoln really thinks is going to happen anymore. And at one point in time, I think USC probably thought it was getting Dylan Raiola. But when you see, Lincoln Riley out there saying what he's saying, when you see actions that would seem to suggest that USC is now recruiting other quarterbacks while Georgia is just clearly not doing that other than Ryan Puglisi, the 2024 quarterback they already have the commitment from, it's almost the same process of elimination that would have once led you to conclude a quarterback like Justin Fields was coming to Georgia. A similar process is in place right now that would sort of leave Georgia and Raiola as the only options for each other, which kind of would suggest this is maybe eventually going to happen. But admittedly, I thought if it did happen, it would happen later on this summer. So if that's not the case, if Raiola really were ready to pull the trigger, the question you would ask is, well, why now? Well, I think you have to acknowledge a couple of very interesting things happening this week that listen, we're going to do some speculating on a rumor, which is always sort of a dangerous thing to do in terms of actually landing on the truth. But nonetheless, we're going to do this anyway. Look at what the last couple of days have sort of featured from Georgia here. Let's go back to Saturday, whereas we were getting ready to begin our pregame coverage of G-Day, and a lot of you were kind of getting settled in there in Athens, ready to watch that game, or getting ready to get settled in to watch it on TV. We found out that Bear Alexander, the former five-star defensive lineman who had pretty good freshman season there at Georgia, he was entering the transfer portal. One of the schools that Alexander's reportedly or rumored to be considering, a school we mentioned a moment ago, USC. Is the potential commitment of Raiola, if it does come, a response to the possibility that USC may be trying to money whip Georgia over Bear Alexander and, get him into their program? I don't know. I guess anything is a possibility there on that. That is certainly a fun thing for some Georgia fans to consider, that all of this might be a response by Georgia to whatever it was that USC has tried to do, allegedly anyway, or possibly maybe even when it comes to Bear Alexander. There was also big news yesterday that you can't ignore, and you have to kind of consider this as a possibility too. Georgia lost a commitment for the class of 2024. Very impressive tight end Landen Thomas. I'll show you this on the screen, what Jeff Sentell wrote about Thomas on Twitter, previewing a story at DawgNation.com. Jeff saying the nation's number one tight end prospect, Landen Thomas, has flipped from Georgia to Florida State. The Seminoles land a premium South Georgia talent for the 2024 class. Now, on the subject of just Thomas alone for a moment, let me say that obviously I do think he's a very impressive prospect. I think that obviously Georgia has other impressive tight ends here. But Thomas, in his own right, just in kind of the universe of the evaluation of him, you have to say this is a big-time prospect. Obviously, also, you have to respect Florida State as a recruiting power, generally speaking, and after lying dormant for a good number of years, it seems like Mike Norvell has them ready to kind of compete here again in a way that maybe they have not in the recent past. And obviously, if you've ever been down to Moultrie, you know that that's about as close you can be to Tallahassee without actually being in Tallahassee. So Colquitt County is kind of fertile soil for Florida State in recruiting, has been for a long time. So a lot of this is sort of the kind of stuff that Georgia should expect to do. If you're going to try to fight for recruits in the southwest corner of the state, you should expect Florida State to be a formidable challenger down there. In the case of Landen Thomas, that's obviously once again proven to be the case. But you also get the sense here that Georgia doesn't plan on giving up on Thomas's recruitment. And any thought of, lost momentum for the Georgia 2024 class because of the decommitment from Thomas, a commitment by Dylan Raiola would change that narrative pretty quick and would be an indication to a guy like Thomas of, hey, you may be thinking about staying closer to home and going to a place like Florida State, and they may be telling you all kinds of horror stories about all the depth that Georgia has at tight end and the problems that's going to cause for you, but we just got a five-star quarterback. We just got Dylan Raiola, if that is indeed what happens. And that's the kind of thing that could cause a guy like Thomas to potentially reconsider that commitment to Florida State. And for Thomas's very impressive teammate down there in Colquitt County, who also happens to be a Georgia commit there as well, wide receiver Nye Carr, it might keep him from wanting to look around there too. That for Georgia, this is a little bit of a two-for story down there because you got both Thomas and Nye Carr. For now, it's just Thomas who has flipped to Florida State, but obviously Nye Carr is one of those guys that some Georgia fans would be worried might be swayed by what Thomas has done here. Well, if there was any potential of that, if Dylan Raiola commits to Georgia, you better believe guys like Thomas and Carr that like catching the football, they would certainly have a lot to think about if they realize now officially for sure out there in the public, out there in the open, that Dylan Raiola is willing to go public with the thought that he's going to UGA. So let me kind of recap all this for right now, and then we'll get ready to move on and have more conversation about this later on in the show. For now, all this is a rumor. All this is a, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? All this is kind of a game of telephone where somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody thinks they have it on pretty good word that five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola is getting ready to commit to UGA, possibly sooner rather than later. That's all that is. But you can't deny there has seemingly been a lot of momentum with Raiola in Georgia over the course of the last few weeks, that whether it happens right now or happens sometime later on in the early portion of the summer, Georgia and Raiola as a possible fit and a possible match with each other, it seems that there is some movement in that direction. But if it does happen now, if Raiola really is ready to go public, it stands as a pretty strong rebuke to USC, who maybe thinks they're going to swoop in here and pay some money to kind of get a guy off Georgia's roster, or players that could be a part of this 2024 class that may be looking around and thinking about something else. All of a sudden, the idea of a great program like Georgia, back-to-back national champions, with a five-star quarterback in place to build for the future, UGA at that point in time becomes a pretty tough program to say no to. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, we start 9:45, first and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, the Apple podcast player, Spotify, worldfamousDawgNation.com. Some of you listen right there on SoundCloud. A lot of different ways to catch the program, whichever way you choose. We're just glad you found it, and we're glad you made it a part of your life and a part of your daily routine. Thank you so much for that. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia who make it all possible here as well. One of the things that we love doing on our show, talking about good things for these dogs, potential big wins in recruiting, certainly big wins in the football field. I think a lot of you are aware it's been 500 days since Georgia's lost a football game of any kind. So obviously there's plenty to celebrate here around UGA, and we talk about it here on DawgNation Daily. And one of the things I love about our friends over at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, Jay, the entire team there, is the fact that when good things happen for Georgia, they're just as happy about that as we are. They're proud partners of UGA. They love supporting Georgia. They love the fact that you all love supporting Georgia. And the thing that I love is the fact that so many of you have chosen to support Engineered Solutions of Georgia there as well because they're support of UGA, and specifically because of their longtime partnership with us here at DawgNation Daily. I love that. I also love what ESOG can do for you as well. If you're a homeowner, taking the right steps to protect your home is obviously one of the most important things you can do. That means being on guard for foundation, for waterproofing issues, water getting in where it's not supposed to be, basement, crawl space, garage. You see the evidence. You know when it's there. Rain comes, and then all of a sudden there's a wet spot, or there's, in some cases, even standing water. That's a problem. And our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because they have the word solution in their name, they want to help you solve that problem. Foundation issues, much the same way. You see the signs of that settling, that cracking, concrete floor in your basement, or maybe sometimes you see those cracks in the walls inside your house there as well. All of that can really be a signal to you that it's time to pick up the phone and dial. Number to get in touch with our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia could not be easy to remember. Simply call 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You can talk to them over there. You can find out why they really take the idea of being a solutions-based company seriously. They have an entire team of engineers on staff. There's nobody else in our market that puts that level of resource to work to help solve your problem, whether it's a waterproofing thing or a foundation thing. Engineered Solutions of Georgia wants to help you with it. So give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Proud partners of UGA, longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. You're going to love them, and you can talk to them there today. All right, housekeeping note to give you. I told our video audience this before we started the show. I'll tell all of you now. Normally it's Jake Fromm on Tuesdays. We're going to catch up with Jake here this week. Jake not available to do that here today, though, so we're going to rearrange things a little bit on his behalf and then talk some G-Day with Jake Fromm. He had plenty to say about quarterback. We'll have plenty to say, I should say, and we'll get a chance to do that with him a little bit later on this week. We'll get Connor Riley here coming up in just a moment. Connor on the subject of Dylan Raiola, also on the subject of G-Day there as well. So all of that's coming up. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the Dawghouse, and we'll do a little G-Day talk ourselves here for a moment, because for all the attention that quarterback got on Saturday, with good reason, Georgia, after all, is trying to figure out who its next starter is going to be, with big shoes to fill after Stetson Bennett, the previous starter the last 2 years, was a part of back-to-back national championships, of course. So finding out who that next quarterback is going to be is a pretty big deal. But I think one of the things that some Georgia fans were pretty fascinated by on Saturday, not just the quarterback delivering the football, but in some cases who was on the receiving end of that. And I don't think you can deny right now that there is the potential makings here of a deeper, more impressive crop of wide receivers than maybe that Georgia has had to begin a season at any other point in time under Kirby Smart's leadership, which obviously dates back to 2016. Arian Smith had 2 touchdowns in this game. That's a guy that I was really pretty impressed with. And Smith is a guy that some Georgia fans sort of also feel like they've kind of gotten a chance to know. He obviously has impressed with his blazing speed. He was one of the heroes of the Peach Bowl win against Ohio State. So, that's one of those guys I think a lot of Georgia fans are kind of counting on. But we're also learning a little bit more about a couple of guys that were a lot farther off the radar than that. Walk-on like Mekhi Muse, less than heralded recruit like Dylan Bell. But both Bell and Muse really had some moments for Georgia on Saturday, so much so that it was a portion of Kirby Smart's post-game press conference after G-Day on Saturday to discuss Muse, to discuss Bell. And, Kirby kind of talked about what he had seen from them, and all of this in the context of what I thought overall was a pretty good day for the most part for Georgia wide receivers, both guys that we know about and guys that we're maybe learning more about Kirby Smart from Saturday.
Muse does that every day. Muse is a guy that last year he kept getting really close to being able to play and help us. He was on the scout team, so I had seen him make plays on the scout team, and we put him in a couple games, as the returner. He very sure-handed, makes good decisions. You saw today he's got some return ability, exciting, and you get what you get from Muse every day. Like, the guy is a worker, and I thought he made some plays today with his feet, and he caught a couple of really tough catches. Dylan Bell does that each and every day. I mean, he was a guy that made some plays, and he got better this spring. Dylan got thrust into playing due to some injuries with AD and things, and he took the bull by the horns and really played well, and then he had a good spring for us. He was very productive this spring.
So a couple of quick things here. I think the Muse thing's a really fun story. Obviously, the athleticism that he showed, there was one kick return type thing that got called back just because they're not doing that for spring games. But what we saw with our own eyes was an incredible level of athleticism, and he showed that with a couple of the catches that he had there too. This is a pretty impressive athlete. I think you have to take him seriously here just because of that athleticism. But I also like the Muse story because, to me, this is an example of what Georgia does so well. We just spent 10 minutes off the top of the show talking about a 5-star quarterback, and so many of the recruits that generate conversation around here are going to be of the 5-star variety, the very high 4-star variety, the sort of elite recruits that are kind of in a separate category from most college football players. And yet, while Georgia probably brings in as many of those elite recruits as any program does, they are still just as serious about evaluating any other football player they think can give them a chance to win, including in some cases, walk-on type guys who maybe weren't getting enough attention other places, but Georgia just seems to have a scouting department, if you will, that just kind of finds diamonds in the rough at all positions, both sides of the ball, better than almost anyone does. And maybe Mekhi Muse is maybe the next example of all of that. That's, I just think, a really cool thing about Georgia is if you get a chance to be a part of practice, you're going to be evaluated. And if you're showing yourself to be capable, you're going to get your shot. And we're seeing that happen over and over again. Georgia takes all that stuff very, very seriously. On the Dylan Bell part of this, here's what I love about the Georgia wide receiver room moving ahead for this upcoming season. It just seems like Georgia potentially has a lot of different kind of receivers. Obviously, I think there's been an intentional attempt to upgrade this unit from a speed standpoint. I would say that's worked. Georgia seems faster at receiver than it seemed before. But the same way, you don't want every receiver to be big and strong, but not quite so fast. You also don't want every receiver to be really, really fast, but not quite so durable. And when you think about what Bell did, showing leaping ability, kind of showing that body type of his that I think makes him, pretty attractive here as a prospect, that as a bigger, stronger wide receiver to be paired with some of the speedier guys that Georgia has, this is not only potentially the best crop of receivers that Georgia has had under Kirby Smart, this may be the most diverse receiving room that Georgia has had under Kirby Smart there as well. And those two ideas might be connected. The success of this receiving room this year, if it does truly come to pass, may be because of all the different kinds of receivers that Georgia has found. I think you give Brian McClendon a lot of credit for that, for both bringing them in and develop them. And I think you also kind of think, and we'll get more on Bobo later on this week, but I think you also have to kind of think ahead to the idea that there's a lot of cohesion between this offense here right now. A lot of cohesion between, guys that have worked together before. Brian McClendon, a guy who's, obviously a former Georgia assistant in a previous life, but also a former Georgia player, getting settled in to now be a part of a Mike Bobo offense that, if you watched on Saturday, I think has a real chance to take advantage of the skill set that Georgia has in play. So all of that really something to consider. Will make that around the Dawghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. All right, so before we are done on our program here today, there's a lot I want to get into. There's more transfer news as it relates to the Georgia Bulldogs. We will cover that. Another name yesterday going to the transfer portal. Potentially a little bit of an evaluation of Alabama that's not all that dissimilar to some of what you've heard from us here over the course of the last few days there as well. One of the alarms that we've sounded about the Crimson Tide, all of a sudden it seems like some other folks are starting to notice that. We'll tell you what's out there about that there as well. And some hype starting to brew here a little bit too for an opponent that Georgia fans have certainly loved to hate here recently. We'll give you all the information as it relates to that there as well. But for now, the man of the hour seems to be five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. Is this real? Is it fake? Is it something in between? And what else do we take from what we saw from G-Day on Saturday? What do you say we cover all of that right now as we get ready to welcome back Connor Riley here to DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll bring Connor Riley into the discussion we were having a couple of moments ago. And Connor, what I said to our audience was, if this Dylan Raiola rumor turns out to be true and Raiola commits, I don't think it should be surprising to UGA fans that the choice is Georgia. I think that's seemingly where this has been moving here over the course of the last few weeks, perhaps even longer than that, but there's been plenty of evidence you could string together here over the course of the last few weeks. The surprising part of this for me might be that it comes now as opposed to after the official visit that we expect Raiola to take to Georgia to begin the month of June. So with that said and kind of reiterated, what do you make of all that's out there right now? How seriously do you take all of this?
Yeah, if we're talking rumors, I'm more of a dreams guy. I understand if you really love the chain, Oh, wait, we're not talking about Fleetwood Mac album. I think, I get it from Dylan Raiola's sense. Look, there's been a lot of quarterback movement in recent weeks as far as what we've seen on the high school recruiting scene. This is a guy that committed early on to Ohio State. He's known about the recruiting process for a while. He's taken multiple visits to USC, to Georgia, to Nebraska. He's seen a lot of these places. And, at a certain point, he probably wants to get this kind of circus over with as well. I mean, he's certainly aware of it. You see online the chatter that this rumor has sparked yesterday, and I do think there's some credence to it, and I understand it. Just given the way the reporting has gone on Raiola, it's been a very plugged-in recruitment. This has not been a quiet recruitment in the slightest. And so it sounds like there is some smoke cooking, and usually with the way things have gone in this Raiola recruitment, when there is smoke, there is potentially fire. And so I think, it makes sense for Georgia. I think the way it's been trending, I would say, since he finished his sort of March visits where he went Georgia, USC, and Nebraska, and it's sort of been moving this way. He did not take any visits recently, did not go to Georgia spring game, is not expected at USC and Nebraska spring game. And so you do sort of see things lining up to be the end of his recruitment. He does have an official visit scheduled right now, but there's only one, and it's with Georgia during that first week in June. So there is some writing on the walls here that there are rumors and you see things trending in the right direction for Georgia.
Yeah, so what I said and have said on our show over the course of the last few weeks is that to me it seems like Georgia is the eventual pick on the basis of process of elimination. I try to follow the recruiting stuff on the internet pretty closely. There's really very little chatter about Raiola coming out of Nebraska circles right now, even though there's the strong family tie. It sort of seems like they've waved the white flag here. And the most significant thing to seemingly happen in all of this as of late is the idea that Elisha Brown, who's a quarterback, goes to the Mater D program out in California. He has been talking openly about how much USC has recently increased its recruitment of him, which would seem to me to be a sign that USC knows that it's not likely to win with Dylan Raiola, because comparatively speaking, we haven't seen Georgia do anything with any other quarterbacks right now, other than obviously Ryan Puglisi that it has a commitment from. But Jake Merklinger went to Tennessee. Georgia didn't lift a finger. Georgia was never really involved in Aaron Nolan, but he goes to Ohio State. Georgia's seemingly content to stand pat with all that there as well. That Georgia has been all in on Raiola, remains so. But for USC, who at one point in time I think was considered by some to be the leader, they're not all in on Raiola at all. You've got Lincoln Riley sort of seemingly subtweeting Raiola with some of his spring comments. You've got them recruiting other quarterbacks now. It sort of seems like somebody in L.A. knows something, and from a Trojan perspective, it does not appear to be good.
Yeah, and look, Georgia's made it clear what their priorities are with this quarterback position in the 2024 recruiting class for a while. They wanted to take 2 guys. They've been recruiting Dylan Raiola very hard, even dating back to when they were recruiting Arch Manning. They very much were enticed by the idea of what Dylan Raiola could bring to this 2024 recruiting class. They go out and get Ryan Puglisi, and I think the addition of Puglisi is a big one and one to keep in mind because he knows and is well aware of all of this chatter around Raiola as well. And so, Georgia's made it clear they want 2 quarterbacks in this class. It's a difficult needle to thread, especially keeping them happy on campus. But, that's every quarterback in college football these days. It's hard to do. There's a reason why Carson Beck is the only quarterback in the 2020 signing class that is still with his original program that has not started a game yet. There's a reason he's a bit of an anomaly there. How many 5-star quarterbacks would have waited into their 3rd year to possibly get a chance to start like Brock Vandagriff? I don't think that number is very high. And so Georgia knows and has known its plan at the quarterback position for this 2024 recruiting class in a while. It's felt very comfortable in these deep waters, and that's why, they feel very comfortable going to the mat for Dylan Raiola. They did so with Arch Manning last year. It did not work out, and Georgia was able to pivot and find a quarterback roster-building solution that it feels comfortable with. And as we sit here on April, 18th is it? They feel very comfortable, and rightfully so, about where things stand with their quarterback recruiting right now. And it speaks to, obviously, yes, the job that Mike Boba has come in and done in replacing Todd Monken on that staff, but furthermore, just the vision that Kirby Smart had for this quarterback position, for this quarterback room, something that he is often, very much so, even by both you and I, have been criticized for. And if he's able to land Dylan Raiola along with keeping Ryan Puglisi in the class, that's a lot to like about what you bring in one quarterback recruiting class.
All right, let me do one more thing on this, and we'll talk about G-Day here for a moment. I think a lot of Georgia fans, myself included, kind of like the idea of, well, if all of this is real, and if it does happen sooner rather than later, then that means the timing of this doesn't feel like all that much of a coincidence. It's either a rebuke against USC, which might be trying to swoop in here and steal a player off Georgia's roster, possibly money whipping them for Bear Alexander, or maybe a response to Landen Thomas' decommitment yesterday. Are you sure you want to go to Florida State? Because look what we have in place as a quarterback with your future. And Denai Carr, who's Landen Thomas' high school teammate, listen, I know Landen may have made this decision, but this is who you're going to get a chance to catch passes from if you come to Georgia. It's always a little tricky when you start speculating about something that's only a rumor, but that speculation, I think, is fun for some Georgia fans that, this is the kind of thing that could cause a guy like Landen Thomas to reconsider the decision he made yesterday, flipping to Florida State. And it could be a signal, much like the great Jack Black cameo in Anchorman of, oh, you think you're going to take a transfer off our roster? Now this is going to happen, and we're going to respond to that by taking the quarterback that everybody thinks that you wanted in Dylan Raiola. I don't know if any of that's true, but it's certainly fun to consider.
So is Bear Alexander the burrito that hit Jack Black on his motorcycle? Is that the analogy we're making? I think look, Kirby's done this before, not obviously with the magnitude of a 5-star quarterback like Dylan Raiola, but bad news, especially from a PR standpoint on Georgia and their recruiting and a player acquisition standpoint. It usually doesn't linger for a long time, and sure, even I'm inclined to admit that, you lose Bear Alexander to the transfer portal, most likely USC. You lose Landen Thomas to Florida State. I don't think he is going to flip back to Georgia. I think he seems pretty solid in his decision to go to Florida State. Usually that doesn't linger for a long time, and if Raiola does end up committing sooner rather than later, I think that's going to blow off both of those things from, the front page news that they have been in recent days here. And so, is Kirby still that worried about being a puppet master at this stage of his career when it comes to, winning and things like that, where he's won 2 straight national championships? I don't think so, but again, as I think you're right to point out, the timing of all this is a little interesting. I think maybe more the events of how the rest of the quarterback recruiting cycle has sort of wound down here, and it seems like more and more spots are getting filled. I think that's playing a role in this, but you certainly can read the tea leaves and see the way the wind is blowing and understand that Kirby Smart might be getting ready to take a precious quarterback from Lincoln Riley and punch him off the bridge in sunny San Diego.
You love the thought of that. Shifting gears to G-Day, I guess we'll get to a few things here, but to start off with, I thought the day belonged to Carson Beck. Maybe the first half was better than the second, but I think in the first half, I was pretty ready early in the game to say, okay, well, Carson Beck's going to be Georgia's starting quarterback. No disrespect to Brock Vandagriff, no disrespect to Gunnar Stockton, but Carson demonstrated what a fourth-year player, I think, is supposed to demonstrate. Was it that cut and dry for you looking in on this, Connor?
Yeah, I think there was pressure on Carson Beck to go out there and perform. And while, yes, I'd heard Brock Vandagriff had a very good spring, and I'd written as much and said that, comparatively, I thought Vandagriff was a little bit better this spring than Beck had. But Beck was still the leader. He was still the guy that I thought was going to be the starter going into G-Day. And then you see why that's the case on Saturday. He goes out there, performs, plays really well. Maybe had the best practice he had of the 15 for G-Day. And that's something you want to see from a quarterback in that situation. Now, he's going to have to continue to do the right things to outright win this job in the offseason, something we didn't necessarily see him do, especially going back to 2021 with that backup job. And look, Carson Beck has played well in spring games before. He did so in 2022. He did so in 2021. But there's obviously a lot more pressure on him this time around to win the starting job and hold off Vandagriff and Stockton than there is in winning the backup job. And so, well, yes, I thought he was exceptional on Saturday. He answered any and every question that I think anyone would have had. He's still got to go out there and continue to win this job in the offseason. I expect him to do that. This is what you would want to see from a fourth-year player. But as far as what we saw on Saturday, I think he answered just about any question anyone would have.
And I thought it was good enough that, to me, it kind of put some bigger spotlight, if you will, on the summertime of the year. Now, spotlight's kind of a funny word to use because we're not going to be seeing any of this. It's all kind of private behind closed doors. But, Kirby talked about this on Saturday about what a quarterback does now to kind of rally the team and, allow the team to build its belief in that player. I thought that Beck was good enough on Saturday that I do think it's time for him to do that. And I think that from a Georgia coaching standpoint, it's probably time to start talking about what you do to develop around Beck, the offense to take advantage of his skill set, Beck himself in this role that I think you can kind of move on to next steps here. Even if Kirby Smart's not going to articulate that the way that Steve Sarkisian did with his own quarterback situation at Texas earlier this week, for all intents and purposes, I believe it's still probably just as true. So, to me, this is about now moving forward, Beck building belief from his teammates in him, and Georgia building an offensive system around Carson Beck. And I think it's probably time to do that based on what we saw on Saturday. Do you agree, Connor?
I wonder how much of this and these conversations are had starting May 1st rather than starting right now, given that is when the transfer portal window closes. And while I don't expect Brock Vandagriff to transfer, I thought he had a good spring. I thought he made some strides with where we have seen him in the past. And, well, yes, I expect Carson Beck to be the guy, and I expect him to be the starter. I think Brock Vandagriff is also lined up to play this year, given when you expect Georgia to win some blowouts. And we've said this before, and I'm not saying Carson Beck is going to get hurt, but we've seen quarterbacks pick up injuries and struggle to get through an SEC slate fully healthy. That's going to give whoever that backup quarterback is a chance to get some reps, a chance to earn some playing time, to show and put some tape out there and develop and get some depth there. There's value, I think, in being at a juggernaut program like Georgia and getting reps in games where Georgia is going to blow opposing teams out. And, obviously you don't expect it to be in the national championship game like we saw last year, but there are points throughout the season where Carson Beck, you think back to the Vanderbilt game specifically, really benefited from getting some extra reps there and some extra repetitions. And I think that set Georgia up well going into this season. I think, yes, they're going to believe and instill things in Carson Beck, but I think they also owe it to Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton as well to continue to get them ready and continue to prepare and develop them. And so I don't expect Kirby Smart to necessarily put all his eggs in one basket at this point, because as much as Carson Beck has shown, he hasn't shown that he can do it, on the road in Neyland, in Jacksonville in late October, on the road at Auburn. There are still some things that he's got to prove that, quite frankly, he just can't in the offseason, and it's understandable there. But I do think that Georgia's going to do and give every opportunity for not just Carson Beck, but Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton to grow, get better, and make an impact on this team in one way or another. I
want to ask you about Bear Alexander before we're done, more specifically on that situation. But I guess prior to that, what else from G-Day stood out to you? We didn't learn much about running back. I like what I saw from wide receiver. A lot of really good young defensive players in this program's future, which I guess is not a huge surprise necessarily. What was the other kind of non-quarterback takeaway that you're left with from this past Saturday?
Whoever is that quarterback, I think is really set up for success with this offense, with the wide receivers, tight ends, and offensive line that Georgia has. I think when you look at what they have there at those three positions, it's probably more than Stetson Bennett ever got to work with. It's probably more than Jake Fromm, I think, ever got to work with. There is a ton of talent surrounding whoever that quarterback is going to be. And while, yes, there are legitimate questions about the running back position and what's back there, just given the amount of injuries we saw at that position this spring. If Georgia wants to lean into throwing the football a little bit more this year, like I think they're going to, they've got plenty of talent and weapons around whoever that quarterback is going to be, most likely Carson Beck, to really set him up for success. I thought Arian Smith had a big day. Dylan Bell opened some eyes with some playmaking he made downfield. Brock Bowers is Brock Bowers. There's not much more we need to say there. I've been saying for a while, I think there's real talent in this wide receiver room. We haven't always gotten a chance to see it through the injuries, but you feel really good about what you have across the board, I think, at wide receiver, tight end, and offensive line, making things very, very easy for whoever is going to step in at that quarterback position coming out of G-Day.
All right, Connor, I'm going to push pause on our conversation because we got some business we got to take care of here on this end. We'll pick back up with you and talk more about everything that happened with spring later on. But for now, we're going to let you go. Thanks for being a part of our program today, and we'll look forward to having you back here again on our show very soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
All right, we're going to let Connor go a little earlier than I planned to. Jake Fromm, who is not going to be able to join us today, is ready to join us right now. So, Michael, if we can, let's go ahead and get Jake Fromm on the phone, because I do, in the midst of this quarterback conversation, want to get some thoughts from Jake on quarterback. So we'll get ready to do that. Graphics-wise, we may not be completely set up on all of this, but it'll still be a good, fun conversation to be able to have. Jake in the midst of doing some quarterback work of his own right now, so he's good enough to squeeze in some time for us while he's in the midst of doing all of that. I told you initially off the top that he might not be able to join us today, but we're glad to be able to be able to have a chance to do that. Obviously, Jake was watching what happened on Saturday at the quarterback spot very closely, and his opinion on that kind of stuff always really valuable. You heard Connor Riley say some interesting things on that topic, too, about what looked to be a pretty good day for Carson Beck. Not a bad day for the other quarterbacks necessarily, but in terms of the mystery and intrigue we have about who that starting quarterback is going to be. Obviously, Carson Beck took a big step towards all that on Saturday. With that in mind, let's bring in a guy who knows this situation very well. The former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, also now working on his own pro career there, too, and busy doing that this week, but he's going to spend some time with us here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take right now. Jake, thanks for making time for us today. We hope you're doing well.
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you there as well. I guess without further ado, what'd you think about quarterback on Saturday for the Georgia Bulldogs there at G-Day?
Hey, man, I thought the guys played well. It was actually super fun to watch, man. Moving the ball up and down the field, throwing the ball around. Glad that Bobo let them sling it. Get to see what these guys are all about, all the things we've been hearing from spring practice. And, let me tell you, man, Carson played extremely well. Man, he looked like a vet out there, slinging the ball around, making completions. I don't think he had a completion until his maybe 7th, 8th, 9th throw of the day, and even then, arguably, the ball should have been caught. So, man, he looked calm, he looked poised, and, was taking shots down the field and hitting them when he needed to, but also checking the ball down as well when the play said that's the play to make. So, also love Gunner's play too, man. His first series didn't necessarily go quite the way he wanted, a quick 3 and out. And then after that, man, he came fighting back, moved the ball around, had a 2-minute drive and everything. So Gunner played well as well.
Kirby actually mentioned you in his post-game press conference on Saturday about the way in which, after the spring, you got to get ready to kind of take the bull by the horns with this team and sort of, become the kind of leader that causes the team to want to rally around you. So let's just say, for the sake of conversation, Kirby obviously didn't say this, but let's just speculate for a moment. Let's say that Carson played well enough on Saturday to go along with the rest of his spring performance that he might be this team's starting quarterback here this year. What do the next 2 months look like for him, or whoever it is that starts a quarterback for Georgia? But how do you lead in the summer the way that you once did as a Georgia starter and the way that someone like Carson Beck might be asked to do now?
Yeah, this is a big jump going from the spring game where you gain a lot of confidence in that game, you move the ball around, you have some success, and it's good to be able to do it on the field in front of a crowd, in that kind of environment. But now he's got to go behind closed doors, really get guys on the same page. Hey, let's go off, let's get a break. We deserved it, we earned it. But now, man, when we really come back for this summer, man, we got to be locked in, laser focused. We're going to lead by example. We're also going to pick up our voice a little bit during these summer workouts, really starting to push guys, get guys in shape, and get guys learning this offense and every little detail about it that we need in order to have success in the fall.
And obviously Carson's a fourth-year guy. You got, the other two guys you talked about, Gunnar a moment ago, Brock, Vandergrift there as well. They're a little bit younger. What does it mean for them if the pecking order maybe looks the way that it did on Saturday, where maybe Carson's likely to start? What do guys like Brock and Gunnar then do if that is the way that it's going to work out?
Yeah, I think in the summertime and on through camp, I really don't think anything changes from an approach standpoint from those two guys. For them, man, hey, I'm still fighting and clawing. I'm still competing. Why would I just let someone have the starting quarterback position for the University of Georgia? Man, I want that. I'm going to compete. I'm going to fight and do everything I can during these summer workouts, during camp, to still fight for this thing because I still want it. And so from them and their perspective, man, I'm going to do all I can from a leadership standpoint, knowing this offense, and doing everything possible during these 7-on-7s during the summer, to be in a position to have a good fall.
I know your time is limited today, but I want to get this topic in with you there as well, which is I thought one of the other big takeaways from G-Day on Saturday, not just quarterbacks, but who it was the quarterbacks were throwing to. And, Jake, to me, it seems like right now Georgia sets up to be maybe as strong at wide receiver as it has been at any point in time under Kirby Smart. You got, some guys who are fast. You got a collection of guys like Dylan Bell who kind of have a little bit of, strength to them. It seems to be not just a deep wide receiver room, but potentially pretty diverse with the different kinds of players who are there. What did you see from Georgia when it comes to wide receiver on Saturday?
Look, I agree 100%. It sucks to have A.D. Mitchell gone and at Texas, but the guys they brought in from the transfer portal, from high school, new enrollees, and all these different guys, man, that's a good room. We got guys who can stretch the field vertically, and we got guys who we can get in their hand early and quickly, and who can make some plays with their feet, yards after catch, breaking tackles, and we got to see a little bit of that as well on this past Saturday. So we saw a little bit maybe from scheme-wise, from Bobo getting the ball in playmakers' hands early, and I'm excited about it. It's going to be fun to see.
Yeah, I guess would you mind telling us a little bit about that there as well? Because I think a lot of Georgia fans were trying to figure out, okay, what can you learn about this new offensive coordinator? Not so new because he's been around Georgia obviously a long time, but in comparison to the Todd Monken system that's worked so well the last couple of years, what in particular did you see from Mike Bobo on Saturday?
Honestly, I saw a lot of the same stuff that we saw with Monken. Obviously, you're going to get a super dumbed-down version of everything in the spring game. But it was still fun to see him letting it rip a little bit too, and getting a little creative in the spring game. Very tough to tell one way or another scheme-wise, and we'll see a lot kind of during this fall camp scrimmages of who they want to be and what that identity is. We can really get pads on and start getting physical.
Brock Vandergrift said something really interesting the other day that Mike Bobo kind of told all those quarterbacks at the beginning of this year, hey, I'm going to coach you hard. And basically Brock kind of joked and said our only choice was to say, okay, yes, sir, and sort of move on. As a quarterback yourself, like how much do you like that kind of intense coaching where a guy's going to really kind of get in there hands-on with you, whether it be at the NFL level now, college level, even high school level? How much did you like that good, intense, hard coaching as a quarterback? Is that something that you kind of craved as a player?
Yeah, I think, man, if I want to speak for everybody, but most of the greats, and if you want to be great, you're going to want to be coached. And I never wanted to get in a position in my playing career where I felt like I couldn't be coached, or someone couldn't say something to me. Be able to have the humility in myself to say, hey, I need to get coached. I need to be coached harder than anyone on the field, because our position is the hardest on the field. So I want to be coached more than anybody. And I think Coach Bobo does a great job of coming with a lot of intensity with that.
We know you got to go, so I'll ask you one more. We'll let you go after this. Georgia fans also learned something kind of weird on Saturday, that a guy like Bear Alexander had a pretty promising freshman season. Looks like he's going to leave the program via the transfer portal. As a guy who kind of played in the era prior to the one we're in now, how tough is it to make sense of this kind of new age that we live in? And how much of a challenge do you think it is for a Georgia, collection of teammates to know that a guy that they had been kind of competing and playing alongside with, boom, just like that, he's gone? How tough is that to make sense of right now?
Yeah, I think every situation is uniquely different, and the reasons why guys leave and their motivations, and there's a lot that goes with that. But from a team perspective, hey, man, I'm excited to see who my new teammate's going to be, and be able to build a relationship with them, and for them to come on and help our football team. So that's the way I look at it.
Jake, great stuff. I know you're busy. Thanks for spending some time with us here today, squeezing us in the midst of everything else you got going on. We'll look forward to obviously getting a chance to talk to you soon, and just good luck with everything you got going on, all right?
Yeah, Brandon, thank you. Look forward to it.
All right, good stuff there with Jake Fromm. Really appreciate that. And also remind you that this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on the program here today. Of course, we get a chance to do that each and every week. I will tell you that Jake right now, obviously on the Washington Commanders organization, he's up there working, getting ready for everything that's going to be going on there this spring and this summer. So that's kind of what he has going on right now. And so nice in the middle of all that to give us a call and be a part of that. And great to be able to tell you that our Kroger Fresh Take, of course, brought to you by our friends at Kroger. Don't forget, coming up at Kroger here very soon, you've got Administrative Professionals Day. That's coming up on April 26th. Now, for those of you, you got your business, you got your job, whatever else, so many of those great administrative professionals help make what we do possible and kind of keep everything humming the way that it's supposed to. So coming up on April 26th, I know you're going to want to show support to those who've supported you, Administrative Professionals Day, and Kroger's got you covered for everything you need. Greeting cards, gift cards, so much more. You can get all of that. Just stop by and do your shopping right there in store, or go to Kroger.com for a lot more on that. But great to hear Jake's thought on what he heard from Carson Beck, what Carson Beck does now, and also some very interesting things to say about Gunnar Stockton as well. Hope you caught that with Jake Fromm there just a moment ago. Okay, so looks like we have a little bit of issue. So from that standpoint, we're going to get ready to shift gears here, and we'll do our SEC through now after that. So no music today on our SEC through, but nonetheless, we'll be ready to cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean today. And obviously, a lot of planning going on behind the scenes with all of us, both at home, kind of getting packed up now. And boy, that cruise experience, you always are, you sort of know it's getting real, and you sort of know you're there on that when you start getting packed up and kind of putting those finishing touches together. I had to go buy a new pair of flip-flops yesterday, so that's obviously really exciting. That lets you know you're getting ready for that cruise vacation. For us, it does take place next week. And obviously, when you hear us talking about that, getting excited about that, it can be a cue to you that it's time to plan your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Certainly, it's time to start thinking about that. You got vacation coming up in June, July, into August, or you start thinking about, late 2023 holiday-themed cruises, things like that. It's time to do all of that. Our friend Jessica Slater, great travel agent, who's specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can help you with all that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. Nobody knows the Royal Caribbean product and the array of services they offer like our friend Jessica Slater. She's going to be with us next week on our DawgNation cruise, and she can be with you alongside your own journey as you get ready to plan your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Don't forget, if you can't make your cruise experience happen here in 2023, it's also not too early to start thinking about January of 2024 as well, and the debut of Icon of the Seas, a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience unlike anything you've ever had before. Largest cruise ship in the world when it debuts. It combines all the great things you love in a vacation all in one spot. Largest water park at sea. It's like a floating resort. I mean, it's just going to be an unbelievable experience. No cruise ship ever like it before, even in the Royal Caribbean fleet. This is really redefining what it means when it comes to a cruise vacation experience. Can't wait for so many of you to enjoy all of that. January of 2024, the debut of Icon of the Seas. All right. So as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now, Sans Music, I want to talk to you about a couple of things. First of all, Georgia related here, but this eventually could have some impact, I guess, on the SEC there as well. Transfer portal window is open. We've been talking about that. Obviously, Bear Alexander, the high-profile name that goes in there. We also found out yesterday another Georgia player enters the transfer portal too. This is linebacker Ryan Davis. And, Davis is one of those guys that I've always felt had a lot of promise. In fact, he's on the field, some for Georgia a year ago in what turned out to be a national championship season. You can't say that Davis isn't a promising prospect. He has dealt with a lot of injuries. Unfortunately, this even goes back to his high school career there as well. He was injured at the end of his high school career, been injured a good bit at Georgia. Some of those have even been, pretty serious enough to take him off the football field for a sustained period of time. And as he's dealing with that, Georgia's also got a responsibility to put the best linebackers it can into the program. And you think about a recruiting cycle like this past year where you bring in Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen, both of which looked very good on G-Day. Troy Bowles coming in here eventually to go along with established starters like Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smile Mondon, who in Mondon's case we didn't see at G-Day on Saturday, but we know he's one of the very best players in the entire country. And eventually when you see all that depth of the linebacker spot, if you're a guy like Davis who hasn't quite gotten your chance to shine because of the fact that health has been just sort of hard to come by, eventually you realize, okay, well, I guess my spot is sort of better attained somewhere else. It's the same decision that Tresman Marshall made not too long ago, and Marshall's in line for some real serious playing time in a place like Alabama. That gives you an idea of how deep Georgia is at linebacker right now, that even a place like Alabama looks like grass being greener. For Tresman Marshall, there's some music, kicks in there, gives you a chance to go and play and be a part of that. And Ryan Davis may have to make a similar decision right now where I want to play, I want to show people what I'm all about. It's going to be hard to do that at Georgia. I've been here now for a while, and maybe now it's just sort of time to go try it somewhere else. I will tell you that, different people have different opinions about the transfer portal, when it's good. Is it always good? Is it never good? I would say situations like this are kind of what the transfer portal is for. I'm not happy about losing Ryan Davis necessarily, but I do get it where he's coming from his standpoint, because you get one shot at a college career. You get one chance to go out there and be the best version of yourself. And obviously, you want to be on the field somewhere doing that. So for a guy like Ryan Davis who says maybe it's time for me now to go try my hand somewhere else, I think this is a guy you shake his hand, you say thanks for being here. Sorry it didn't quite work out the way either side probably hoped it would or maybe even believed that it would, but you wish him well as he goes on to the next phase of his life. You have different feelings maybe about different transfer situations. This is one of those where I think even Georgia fans were a little skeptical about the portal in general, would kind of understand where a guy is coming from when it comes to something like this. It's also an issue right now where Georgia is trying to make sure it's kind of at that 85 scholarship threshold. You've got a handful of summer enrollees still yet to come. Most of Georgia's class already early enrollees. They've been here. Small handful still yet to come. And so Georgia needs to make sure they've got enough room for them, which means that Georgia actually needs a couple of transfers this time of year to be able to do that. So Ryan Davis sort of becomes one of those guys. I think you wish him well as he does that. And obviously, we'll be looking at the rest of the SEC now for more of those transfer portal names. You got between now and April 30th to get in there. We'll obviously be following all of that. So one of the things we've talked about a good bit here lately is the Alabama quarterback situation, and what we think has been a pretty quiet spring as it relates to Ty Simpson, who, is a guy that a lot of Alabama fans, I think, to begin the year thought would be the Alabama quarterback. Tide fans saw Jalen Milroe playing in place of an injured Bryce Young some last year. Milroe was unspectacular to say the least, and a lot of Tide fans think, well, if he's not great, then Ty Simpson must be the answer because they believe it's just sort of their birthright to have a great quarterback. But it is possible that neither Milroe nor Simpson is great, and it is also possible that Ty Simpson just, what is it they say these days, like the kids like to say that he's him, that Ty Simpson just isn't him, that he is not him when it comes to that overall situation. And we've been saying this now for a little while, that can't help but notice how quiet it has been on the Ty Simpson front. Well, now it seems like even guys like Paul Finebaum are sort of noticing this too. Finebaum speaking here this week. I'm going to read you a little bit of what Finebaum's saying about Alabama here right now. He says on the low end this season, I think they can still be a top 5 or a top 6 team, which from Alabama's standpoint and their fan standpoint would certainly put them on the low end of their own expectations. He says, and that really kind of depends on how you populate Ohio State and USC, maybe Michigan, maybe Clemson, maybe throw somebody else in there, whether it's Penn State or somebody else. He says, a week can change a lot. I don't think it's going to change the internals. It may change the external. He's talking about the quarterback situation here now. We may get out there on Saturday and Milroe or Simpsons look great, in a very limited control situation, and you're getting blown up at 7:30 the next Monday morning about fans saying, we've got a great quarterback. He says, however, I don't think that's going to happen. And based on the buzz that's existed here thus far this spring, I think that's the only conclusion that you can draw. That, maybe somebody has an okay spring performance, but the idea of some huge level of buzz existing around either Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson for Alabama at the end of this spring practice, I just don't think it was going to happen. If it was going to happen, it probably already would have happened. And in this particular case, the silence may just be deafening. Now, can Alabama still be a formidable challenger and a very good team, even if it's only, okay or just good at the quarterback spot, maybe not great? It's certainly a possibility, but it's hard to deny just how much great quarterback play, great passing game, quarterback plus wide receiver, just how much of an overall part of the story that's been for Alabama in recent years. But Bryce Young, who may be the number one overall pick in this year's draft, for now doesn't seem like he's walking through that door. And the quarterback prior to that, Mac Jones, who even in a pandemic year still became a first-round pick, doesn't seem like that level of player is walking through this door. Or Tua Tagovailoa, or suddenly Jalen Hurts, the very rich man that he is, former Oklahoma quarterback who was once at Alabama, doesn't seem like he's walking through that door right now either. It is very interesting how quiet the Alabama quarterback situation is. And if you've got enough bandwidth to find some streaming internet on Saturday to watch this Alabama spring game streaming on the internet, deep, dark corner somewhere on the internet, then you may see for yourself the Alabama quarterback situation, what happens to be going on there with that right now. Very little buzz coming out. Now, Malik Benson, the junior college wide receiver, we're told that he's the next Jerry Rice, the next Randy Moss, the next T.O., or the next whatever. We're told that he's the greatest thing that's ever happened. Well, he has to have somebody to deliver him the football. And right now there is very little buzz as it relates to either Milroe or Bryce Young. You can't help but notice that. By the way, I was also seeing they were already seeing a little bit of hype starting to generate for a guy like Joe Milton as the Tennessee quarterback. Now, what's funny to me about this is it's not obvious that Milton is even going to be able to keep the job all year long. And he was the guy that had the chance to win this thing 2 years ago, and he wasn't able to do that then. Eventually, Hendon Hooker emerged. That was obviously the right decision. Hooker's had a very good career at Tennessee. And look, we do believe that Josh Heupel is a good offensive coach, and getting competent quarterback play is something you should probably expect Tennessee to have under Heupel each and every year. We think that Heupel's proven enough to assume that. But we also are, generally speaking, a little bit skeptical of Milton. And he sort of feels like, to me, what the next year's NFL draft conversation is going to be about guys like, Anthony Richardson or Will Levis from Kentucky. Like, Levis got this huge arm, and yet maybe not a whole lot else to go along with that. If that's true for Will Levis, how much is that also true for a guy like Milton? In fact, by the end of the year, it could be that Nico Iamaleava has actually emerged the Tennessee starting quarterback. But when you get to draft time a year from now, you better believe the same way that, at least for a brief period of time, it seems like a lot of this is kind of quieted down now, but for a very brief period of time, NFL draft scouts were just so enamored by Will Levis and this big cannon of an arm. Well, if you think Levis got a cannon of an arm, wait till you see Joe Milton throw it. He really does have quite the cannon, but I'm not quite so sure he has anything else to go along with that. The same way I'm not quite so sure Will Levis has enough to go along with the very strong throwing arm he has. But you're already seeing some early buzz for Joe Milton in next year's NFL draft, and we'll see if he can use that buzz as a springboard to actually finish a year as Tennessee starting quarterback, something he failed to do the first time around on all of this. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now the music's playing again. All right, so we'll get ready to wrap up today's show, and we'll do so in style with a golden shoe. And we can go ahead and throw that on the screen, and we'll give credit here. Earl Y sharing this. I had a chance to catch up with Earl on Saturday there prior to our DawgNation postgame to the UGA bookstore. Earl writing that it only took 1,926 episodes of DawgNation Daily for me to finally meet the host of the show, Brandon Adams, or better known as BA. He says, check out the daily podcast for the latest news and insights for our dogs as they try to go for 3 in 23. Earl, I could not have said it better myself. Thank you so much for sharing the good word there on all of that. So great to catch up with you there on Saturday. Boy, that was a lot of fun. So many Georgia fans there stopping by to see us at the UGA bookstore on Saturday. What a great treat that was, and what a fun day G-Day was in general. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And to all of you who are part of so many of these 1,900-plus shows that we've done, man, it is such a great thing. We are so grateful for all of that. Y'all have a great day. Oh, by the way, let's also give you a shout-out here to our Gator Hater Countdown. 193 days from now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. That's always a fun thing to think about, beating up on those lousy, stinking Gators. And with that said, we'll wrap up today's show. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and see you again tomorrow. So, pleasant surprise here, as we say, and on video. We got a chance to catch up with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm today. Jake was, I think, expected to be on, later on this week, but he had a little window open up. They're going through OTAs up there in Washington, so he's busy doing some of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't obvious we'd be able to have him on at all, but he was able to make some time and join us here today, which is a really cool thing. So I'm very grateful for that. Also grateful for all of you too, but because of the cruise next week, and because of last year trying to do some cruises trying to do some shows while floating in the middle of the ocean, that turned out to be a little bit of a tricky thing. Because of all of that, I am going to tell you that we're going to pre-record some shows for next week. Some of that work being done here today. That means we can't go crazy long with our comments today, and I apologize for that. We just have a lot going on around here. But nonetheless, we will we'll have some fun here while we can. So with that said, we'll pop over here with some comments on Facebook, comments on YouTube, comments at DawgNation.com, and then get ready to roll out of here after that. So kind of a quick spin today through the comment section, but nonetheless, happy to have you on board here for today. Johnny Prescott just told a very funny story. Philip Jordan Wells also in the very challenging pronunciation of Nico, the Tennessee quarterback. So at one point in time, I used to say Amaleva, which I think turned out to be wrong. Now I say Imaleva, which may still be wrong, but it sort of sounds like it could be right. It's like one of those things that's like sort of affected enough that you kind of feel like, oh, he must know what it is. Jeff has told us that Dylan's last name is Raiola. I am still skeptical of that. But nonetheless, so Jeff has told us to go with Raiola for Dylan. If that's what Jeff says, that's what I'm going to go, although with certainly a side eye of suspicion on that. But yeah, the Imaleva thing is always tricky. Bill Sanders laughing at me for saying we can't go crazy along, and then we go to 11:45 for sure. Sometimes that happens, but probably not today. William Camacho says, will Gunner or Brock enter the portal? I truly don't believe they will. Now, if one does, it's to me far more likely than Brock than Gunner. I mean, I think that Gunner is probably at Georgia for the long haul, and I think he's going to be a really formidable contender to be a starting quarterback at Georgia in the future. He's just still very young right now. He's only, 1+ year removed from high school. Brock's been at Georgia a little longer than that. He's also, I think, getting ready to graduate, so he's going to have all kinds of options to go anywhere he wants. I don't have any reason to believe that he's transferring either. And when you look at guys who do transfer and then ultimately end up not being the starting quarterback, the example we cite is Ole Miss has 3 transfer quarterbacks on its roster. That means 2 pretty high-profile transfers won't be starting for Ole Miss here this season. I think it's important for quarterbacks to keep that in mind, that just because you get an opportunity to make a big transfer somewhere doesn't mean things work out the way you want once you get there. That's just kind of the way that goes. And when you see backup quarterbacks who get a chance to play so much that in a roundabout way, if Brock Vandagriff gets a chance to be the Georgia backup this year, his best path towards actual playing time for a very good team may be as Georgia's backup, because that's what teams have done in the SEC a lot in recent years. They've had reason to trust that backup, so important to consider that. Keith Vold says that his daddy does say Raiola. Well, if Mr. Raiola says that, then that is what it is. Doug Raymond says, insider on the Finebaum show said that Alabama may go for a portal quarterback. I think that's what they wanted to do. I mean, there was the rumor, going back to the winter, they were going to try to, throw a big-time offer at Drake May, the UNC quarterback, but he didn't leave. And, a guy like Sam Hartman went to Notre Dame. So the issue here is, like at one point in time, the Tulane quarterback, who's probably one of the 10 best in the sport, he was rumored to be going to Florida, but he ended up not leaving either. Grayson McCall didn't leave. And I guess there's always a chance that, in different situations, you've got different rumors out there, right? You've got so-and-so quarterback that didn't leave because so-and-so school got the NIL right. You've got so-and-so quarterback that didn't leave because the academics were a mess. Who knows what's true, and you can sort of figure out who's who when it comes to something like that. But that was the big story to me of the winter transfer portal, that we thought it might be a situation where one of these transfer quarterbacks became this year's version of what Caleb Williams was a year ago, the potential of being a little bit of a kingmaker. Hey, I'm a big-time quarterback, and wherever I choose to go immediately becomes a contender. Now, in the case of USC, they don't play any defense, so they weren't a true contender, but Caleb did win the Heisman Trophy with the Trojans this past season. And so I think it's only natural to say, well, who's the next version of that? Well, in the winter transfer portal, that guy just wasn't there. I mean, maybe Hartman could have been that guy, but he went to Notre Dame. And, now that Tommy Rees is gone, you sort of wonder how much Hartman kind of regrets that decision. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't regret it at all. But the point I'm getting to is I'm sure Alabama is looking for a transfer quarterback. I'm not so sure there is a transfer quarterback out there. And even if we say, okay, well, you're going to tamper and you're going to go talk to any quarterback on anybody else's roster, at this stage of the game, I'm not quite so sure what there's left to do. And even if you did coerce or convince a quarterback to leave his current team and you put a deal in place to get him on your roster, all of a sudden now you got to really hurry to get that guy ready for the upcoming season, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. Think about a guy like JT Daniels who didn't get to West Virginia until pretty late last summer, and before the season was done, he lost his starting quarterback job again. A summer arrival transfer becoming a big-time star at quarterback when it's an unfamiliar situation, that's not a given. That's not a guarantee. So I don't think you have to be an insider to say Alabama's looking for a transfer quarterback. They've been looking for one for months. I'm just not quite so sure that guy's out there. I'm really not. Because it's not going to be Drake May. That's not going to happen, I don't think.
Hey, Brandon, we have some breaking news on the NFL draft. One of the most polarizing players. This is the talk of the NFL this morning.
So Will Levis now the second favorite to be taken number 2 overall at plus 275 to Will Anderson's 160. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, look, anytime there's this is a little bit like betting on the next coach at so-and-so. These types of things I don't believe are particularly predictive. And I will point out that, Caesars has this. If you look at Stetson Bennett, his betting odds right now, the shortest odds on him are to be undrafted. So there's some interesting stuff out there as it relates to that too. I don't know how seriously I take that, but there are also plenty of people who know far more about the NFL draft than I do. But I have a hard time believing the first 2 quarterbacks taken won't be C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young in some order, I'm guessing. I do believe Will Anderson will be the first non-quarterback drafted. And, to me, the 2 quarterbacks I kind of put in the same category are Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. And while I'm not a huge fan of either one, I like Richardson far more than I like Levis, just because of his overall skill set. And it seems like the NFL right now, Richardson's really kind of moving up, whereas the best that I can tell, Levis is kind of moving down. Pete Williams says, I'll take Will Anderson every single time over Will Levis. If it were mathematically possible to do this, I'd take half of Will Anderson over Will Levis, if that were possible. Let me go to YouTube for a second. I haven't been there. Let us see. Yeah, in other words, to reiterate, I'm not a huge fan of Anthony Richardson, but I like him by magnitudes over Will Levis. Jonathan Aaron says, I heard Florida made a deal with the movie Waterboy. Gators are ornered because they have all them teeth and no toothbrush, plus all them players, no talent. That's really funny. Spencer Clark says, no, not Richardson, B.A. Not Richardson over most people, but Richardson over Levis, you better believe I do that. Reggie Fly says, if Raiola, Wingo, and Riddell are coming, who's beating us then? Yeah, maybe nobody. Nature Gator says the quarterback from Oregon State in the portal is a good one. Is that Bama? I'll have to plead ignorance here a little bit. Didn't Oregon State mostly run the ball this past season, though? I think Jonathan Smith's a pretty good coach. I think that's probably where if JT Daniels had to do it all over again, he probably should have just gone to Oregon State. Who was the Oregon State quarterback, though? I thought they were mostly a running team this past season. But like I said, I have to semi-plead ignorance. Oregon State was pretty good, I remember that. But I sort of remember a lot of low-scoring games from them, playing a little bit of defense, running the ball, I thought. Foster Moss asks about where JT Daniels is now. JT is now at Rice. He is at Rice. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, if Raiola comes, what does that mean for the future of Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton in so many words? Like, eventually, somebody's going to transfer in all likelihood. I mean, Georgia has had way less transfer quarterback stuff than seemingly some programs have had. But as Connor, reiterated a stat we talked about before, that from the class of 2020, Carson Beck is the only quarterback from that class who's yet to start a game who hasn't transferred. Like, quarterbacks just transfer. So, if Raiola comes, will somebody eventually transfer? Eventually they probably will. But that doesn't speak. I mean, Kirby said the other day, his goal is to only keep 70% of the high school players they sign, period. So if you're losing almost 1 of 3 of your general population of recruits, quarterback's going to be a little bit more volatile than that even. So whether Georgia signs Raiola or not, eventually one of these guys would probably transfer. I just think you got to just sort of take that as the cost of doing business. Frank Patterson says, the one thing I can say about the Shriners quarterback situation, that's what he calls Alabama, is at least they aren't trying to get a sophomore in high school to reclassify, which is very funny. Very funny. Somebody's using the YouTube name B-Ace Tie Stone Cold Style, making fun of me wearing a tie to wrestling back in the 90s. Says, 2 questions. Can we be the rise of Skywalker since we are beating Alabama? We don't have Alabama problems since we have Bobo Muschamp win 3 and sign them all to a 12-year contract. Yeah, I like the idea of that for sure. I like the idea of that. Nature Gator says the Oregon State quarterback got hurt to begin the season, but had really good passing stats in 2021. Well, there you go. Maybe that's the case. So maybe he will find a big market for his services. Could be the case. I have to plead a little bit of ignorance there on that, but could be the case. Tennille also pointing out that I think one of the most mispronounced players ever at Georgia in terms of a name. And listen, I take this pretty seriously. I do want to pronounce players' names right. Eventually he's all just sort of settled on A.D. Mitchell, but I believe the correct pronunciation of his first name was Adonai. I think most of us said Adonai, at least for a long time, but I believe the correct pronunciation was Adonai. Paul Moon says that Tristan Gebbia transferred from Oregon State. Is that Oregon State to Oklahoma State in January? I don't know much about that player. I have to be honest. Now I feel like I'm pretty good at knowing transfer quarterbacks, but I don't know much about that. Andrew Hughes. Yeah, I don't know that more money's ever been spent on something that's been used less than those LED lights at Georgia. Those are not cheap. Stadium lighting like that's got to be in the millions, right? And Georgia's used them twice. It's pretty crazy. Foster Moss says, would anybody from that 2017 defense start or for Kirby now besides Roquan? I mean, there's a part of me that doesn't want to travel that road too much because I don't want to be disrespectful to the 2017 defense, but I sort of know what you're saying. I mean, it's crazy to think from a talent perspective how much has been upgraded. Secondary may be the most stark example of all of that. And like I said, I don't want to kind of take that to its full conclusion because I want to show great deference and respect to the 2017 Georgia defense, one of my all-time favorite Georgia teams. But hard not to notice the talent upgrade. Hard not to notice that. Georgia on Tap says name pronunciations are in the media guide. But in defense of that, Georgia, I'm not even quite so sure, with all due respect to the great sports information staff at Georgia, I'm not even quite so sure how true that is because Rick Gilbert's the best example of this, right? And I forget now which one we even went with. But, I mean, you have people very close to Gilbert who swore by 2 different pronunciations, a Rick and in some cases a Reek. And I forget which one we used and which one, Georgia said was the right one. But eventually I just gave up. I mean, eventually I finally just said, I don't care anymore. And with all due respect, I don't care anymore. Because, I mean, whatever the official pronunciation was listed in the media guide as, I had people very, very close to this situation like, no, it's actually the other one. I forget which one it was. But, some of these are a little tricky. Let's see what else. There you go, Paul Moon with another country heard from there on that. Andrew Hughes, very funny play on words as it relates to the Bear Alexander transfer. That's pretty funny there, I guess. There you go. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Then we'll take one spin around the comment section after that. All right, at DawgNation.com. CDA says Ben Zambiasi always pronounced wrong. How do you say that? Rome Dog says Mimpemba. Yeah. Now the other thing about it, I think that Sam, I think the controversial name thing on him may be the fact that I believe he just wants to be Sam, just Sam Mimpemba, not Samuel. I think that might be the thing there. Rome Dog says Beck showed a good touch on a few throws on Saturday. I thought so too, for sure. Let's see what else. Rome Dog says Gunner had a good day minus the pick six. Yeah, I don't know that I put the pick six totally on him necessarily. That was the Raylan Wilson one, right? I think that got kind of tipped around a little bit. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says, is post-spring practice the best time for these coaches to get some well-deserved PTO? I think for the most part, their vacations take place in July. I think that's one of the reasons why we'll never see a signing period in August. I think because if you go signing period in August, you lose your July vacation, and there really isn't much of that. They may get a couple of days right now, but they're on the road again in May, and June becomes official visits. So they may get a weekend like this weekend or a couple of days right now, but I mean, they're on the road again to kick off May, and then they got visits kicking off in June. So you get a little bit of downtime prior to SEC media days. That's when almost every coach goes dark, goes dead. That's that right now, because I think July is a dead period in recruiting, right? So July is a dead period. Team activities kind of slow down. Coaches aren't allowed to be out there for that anyway. You got about a 2 or so week period before SEC media days. Now, listen, you can also manage your schedule a little bit too. So I'm not saying that every single day is like nose to the grindstone, May, June. You can do a little bit around that, kind of loosen up a little bit. But the best time to really get to the beach and really get away and unplug is probably early July. Randy Hall on the subject of getting down to 85. Yeah, Georgia's got to do that. Now, listen, they're going to be fine on that. They know how to manage all that. They don't really talk openly about that too much. But some of this transfer stuff does aid in that, I think you have to say. All right, final comments here. Let's see what else. Lesko Brandon says, if it was up to you, it was possible, would you keep recruiting, or would you like to see a draft situation for high school coming out of college? Well, as a pro Georgia guy, you would want to keep recruiting the way that it is, because obviously Georgia benefits from that. You definitely would. And to me, I mean, in fact, if I had my way, we'd get rid of drafts in pro sports and have some other way of kind of picking teams. I think the idea of, well, let's give the worst teams the best draft picks, I'm not quite so sure how well that works. I mean, there are some teams that draft near the front end of the draft every single year, especially in, like, say, basketball or something like that. I mean, there are some teams that are in the lottery every dadgum year. So, this idea that, okay, we're going to have a little bit of I guess like a regressive draft or something like that, where we're going to give the worst teams the best picks as a way of helping those teams get better. I just don't know how often that actually even works out. So I think that pro sports ought to mirror the college system a little bit more, where you have a little bit more freedom about where you choose to go to coming into it. Jonathan Aaron says, well, what are the numbers looking like right now? I won't pretend to know. I guess sort of the best sort of back of the napkin math I would have right now is, I would say that to get to 85, Georgia at least needs an additional transfer. I'm not saying it's one more. I'm saying that if you sort of think about where Georgia might be with where it sort of appears that it is right now, that Ryan Davis won't be the last transfer, but are there 2 more, 3 more? I'm not quite so sure about that. But I don't think transfer-wise Georgia might be done. I'm thinking maybe. Foster Moss says, which side of the napkin is the back, which is, of course, always a very good question. Paul Moon says you could always just pull an Eli Manning and just say no when a team drafts you. Yeah, there's, I guess, also that there as well. Wildman Slayer on the subject of Bear Alexander when he was kind of getting into it, Georgia. I mean, listen, this was a guy that obviously, had a little bit of a dramatic recruitment. Sometimes those don't quite work out. But was it worth it on the behalf of Georgia to kind of take a shot on big-time talent? I think it probably was. Was it maybe likely to end up this way? Some people would say maybe that's the case. But ultimately, I think you can be dissatisfied with the situation, maybe a little frustrated with the player, and yet ultimately you just sort of shake it off and you sort of move on. And that's kind of what Georgia's, I think, in the midst of doing right now. Let's see what else. Final comments. We got to go. Keith Fold says if we go to one of those style of drafts in college, we'll never get a top 10 recruit again. Yeah. There are a lot of other teams that would love to see some sort of system put in place that limited Georgia's recruitment. So hopefully that never comes. Barry Watkins says, I think there should be a 90-man roster because of this portal madness. You may be right, but if all of this change really is on its way to college football, I think ultimately we're going to see smaller rosters, not bigger. Because if we're, if players are going to be paid like employees, there are a lot of these. I mean, every ACC team, not counting Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, maybe just Florida State and Clemson, but you think those ACC teams are going to pay 85 players to be on their roster? I mean, these are the same teams. I mean, you got ACC, like NC State's playing at Connecticut this year. I mean, because they don't want to pay $1 million for an FCS or Group of 5 team to come to their own stadium. Maybe they can't afford to. But, I mean, we forget that even at the Power 5 level, there are a lot of programs that either can't or just won't play the game financially speaking. I mean, all we talk about is Georgia and who Georgia competes with, Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, teams like that. I don't think we properly realize what the average college football situation is like. We don't, and by average, I mean the mean, the median, right there in the middle, with the middle tier of college football, not the lowest bottom ranks of FCS or Group of 5. I'm talking about the middle of the Power 5. I don't think we realize what a chasm exists between the Georgia level of play and even the middle of the Power 5 average ACC team, which is pretty frugal, and say nothing of like the Big 12 and portions of the Pac-12 and places like that. These are programs that are trying to cut corners on everything they can as it is. I just don't know how they're either going to have to change dramatically to kind of participate in the future world, or things are going to be way, way different. I mean, those of you who are college baseball fans, how many years has the SEC been pushing to add like an assistant coach or add rosters or whatever else? And none of the other NCAA teams ever go along with this ever because they don't want to pay. Anytime the NCAA votes on anything, there's a huge pocket of schools who are an automatic no on everything because they can't afford it. They either don't want to or just simply can't. But, money is the driving issue for most programs, and most programs are just automatic no's on everything because that's just not the kind of financial world they live in. At Georgia, we don't think that way because, obviously, Georgia's just much more aggressive financially speaking, thankfully has generated enough revenue where that's a possibility. Most college teams are not that way. Even like the middle tier of Power 5 is not quite that way. So Keith Folds brings up an interesting point. We're going to get ready to go after this. He says, if Georgia-Tennessee is not the game of the week when it's played in November, then one of us is in trouble. I think it will be the game of the week. I think there's a chance that Tennessee could be undefeated in that game, at least a possibility. But keep your eye on Tennessee a little bit here. Keep your eye on Tennessee. It'll be worth investigating. Could they win on the road at Alabama? It's a possibility. But could they lose? I mean, for instance, if you care about early look-ahead lines, things like that, they're only about a touchdown, slightly more than a touchdown favorite at Florida. So, Tennessee is going to have a chance to win its one, really big game prior to UGA, but it's going to play some losable games too. I think Tennessee plays Texas A&M this year. Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman not walking through that door. hey, maybe Brew McCoy is the next great Tennessee wide receiver. Maybe Joe Milton or Nico is the next great quarterback. But there is a little bit of a swing possibility for Tennessee. I believe this Vols team could resemble the one from 2021 a good bit more than one from 2022. So my point is I'm a little bit all over the place when it comes to Tennessee. Could they be undefeated and could this be the biggest game of the season for Georgia? That's a possibility. Could Tennessee have lost twice by the time they play Georgia? I think that's a possibility too. More investigation need to be done on that. UGA boy for life Bernetti says, I think there should only be one time a season you can transfer with NIL, only small window of a month. And I think some people are going to say, well, okay, if you want to limit on that, you're going to have to pony up more money to be able to do so. Paul Moon says Beck's the exception, not the norm. We all thought that he was out once Stetson took over at quarterback, but he stuck it out. Credit him for doing so. Yeah, I mean, this is an example of Georgia now maybe being able to get its quarterback situation a little bit more back to what we think normal is supposed to look like. And Beck's willingness to be, kind of persevere through all of this is to his credit, I think, and to Georgia's benefit. Spencer Clark says, never forget we shut Jalen Hyatt down. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Reggie Fly says he's planning on taking 12 cruises this year from Royal Caribbean and buying all his cheese from Kroger. Reggie Fly, you're a man after my own heart. I certainly appreciate that. Great way to close out our conversation here today. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. And don't forget that we talked about this in our first and 15 a little earlier. There's been a little bit of chatter about, not even a little bit, a lot of chatter about a big new arena site coming to South Forsyth and kind of like the unincorporated Alpharetta area as a potential future home for an NHL team. And you could read more about what exactly is going on with that online, ajc.com. A pretty fascinating story, and it is there for you to kind of get all the details on that. Also, big night last night for Max Fried. A very good job for him in his return. Braves get a win against the Padres. Good to see Fried back. Good to see Atlanta continue its winning ways. And, of course, Hawks trying to kind of even things up in their series with the Boston Celtics. Don't forget about that there as well. All right, so we'll cover all that for you there at ajc.com. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Make sure you check them out there, including getting that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So find them online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 9:45 for our first and 15, 10 a.m. after that for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.